All right, so we are slowly opening the Zoom link. I can see some attendees starting to join. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to allow everyone to come in. Good afternoon, everyone that is connecting. I see already about 40 people connected. And we have our speakers, which I will do some small introductions before we get started. And I also see that we're live on Facebook and our social media channels. So to our Facebook group and followers, good afternoon and welcome to this Creative Zone webinar. That today's topic is on SME sector and the SME exports in the UAE. As we were saying, we will give it a couple of minutes and allow everyone to come in. And for those that are connected already, about 40 people, if you want to write on the chat function, where are you connecting from? Are you connecting from the UAE? Are you from abroad? So that we can start getting a sense of who is the audience and whether you are an SME or are you currently employed by someone else. The more info that you want to give us about who you are, the more we can engage with you and get to know you. To my tech team, just to know if the chat function is open to everyone, and make sure that the webinar chat is open for anybody to write. Yes, Amal, hi Lorenzo. So yeah, for those that are there, tell us where you're connecting from. It's working. Good, good. UAE, Dubai, UAE, Rafif, Shali, Risa, Dubai, UAE, okay, so far to Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Tokyo, very nice, Rhonda. Oh, Rhonda, you're in Tokyo right now. JLT, Sharjah, Dubai, Istanbul, good for our friends in Turkey. It's a very sort of mixed international audience today, looks like. Italy, South Africa, Pakistan. Excellent. Luxembourg, Ali. Very good. I see a little bit more people connecting now. All right. So Abu Dhabi, Mariam, I think we will slowly get going with the introductions. And then by the time we finish, we can get straight on to today's session. But as we were saying, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Creative Zone webinar on SME export. We're joined by a great panel of speakers. I will make some small introductions and they're going to go a little bit in depth in who they are themselves and what is it that they do on a daily basis throughout the session of today. But we're joined by Jonpaul Simpson, Director of Logistics Development and Trade Facilitation at the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development. Jonpaul, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Lorenzo. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a very important topic, so happy to be involved in this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again. And Amal Alameh, Head of Consulting from Euromonitor, Middle East and India. Amal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lorenzo. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm from Euromonitor International, and I'm supporting this region's custom research operations. And very interesting topic again, related to exports and SMEs. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Amal, for joining us. Dr. Rajesh Aggarwal, Director Division of Market Development, International Trade Center. Dr. Aggarwal, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you here with us.
Thank you. Likewise, it's a pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel. I mean, as you know, ITC is a joint organization of the United Nations and WTO, and we are very happy to be talking today on this important subject. Thank you.
Great. And last but not least, Zishan Iqbal, Director of Murabaha Solutions from Etihad Credit Insurance. Zishan, thank you for joining us and welcome to this session as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Lorenzo, and pleasure to be meeting the fellow panel members. I'm very excited to be here because SME is an important part of our financial ecosystem, especially and particularly in the UAE. And I'm working with Etihad Credit Insurance, which is a federal organization and the official export credit agency of UAE. and our primary focus is to contribute towards diversification of exports. So look forward to contribute.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Excellent. So we can get started. We have about 60 people connected, and I'm sure more people are joining us as we go along. And during the session, I would like to tell all our attendees, feel free to send us your questions either through the chat function or the Q&A section. We'll be gladly taking some of your questions as we go along. We want to make this as interactive as possible and to raise some of your queries and questions as we go through this. So maybe to get started, Jonpaul, we were discussing before through the work that you do at Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development, but some of the statistics show that from the Ministry of Economy that the SME sector represents more than 94% of the total number of companies operating in the country, and they employ about 86% of the total workforce in the UAE. So when it comes to exports of the SME sector, how substantial do we think, or if we have any statistics in particular, is the contribution of the SME sector when it comes to the UAE exports?
Thanks, Lorenzo. I think firstly, I think traditionally in our economy, we've been very much of an import nation, and export is based on oil. But it's been clear for the last 10 years or so, there's a huge focus on diversifying the economy. And to do that, certainly at the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development, it's highlighted how important the SME sector is to achieving that diversification. So when we look at the statistics, certainly for Abu Dhabi, again, traditionally exports have been mainly around gold, semi-precious stones and metals, and often by quite big organisations, if we're honest. But we're in the process now, we just started the Abu Dhabi Export Roadmap. And a big part of that roadmap is how do we engage SMEs and how do we build that capability and capacity for them to export to new markets. It becomes a very complicated ecosystem very quickly. When we talk about moving goods from point A to B, it sounds very simple, but very quickly it can become very complicated. And what we're trying to do in the UAE and Abu Dhabi is to simplify that as much as possible. I think we're one of the leading trading hubs anyway, but we don't rest on our laurels, and we're continuing to build our capabilities, whether it's government or through infrastructure or the operators of the ports and airports, is continually improve that competitiveness. So we're hoping that combined efforts in that and expanding the SME sector and linking them to new markets will see huge increases in exports from the SME market. And I think just to finalize on that, with the efforts from the MOE as well, which probably most people have seen in the news recently this year, there's a huge effort now in free trade agreements, and we're extremely active in that. So recent agreements with India, Israel, Indonesia, and just even last week, Turkey, that starts to open up huge markets for SMEs in Abu Dhabi. Like the likes of, for example, Turkey and Indonesia, I think it provides huge opportunities for SMEs. And we've developed we've got Abu Dhabi Export Gateway, and I know Dubai has a similar product. That also provides many opportunities and avenues for SMEs to explore. Would you like me to expand more on the Export Gateway now, or leave that for later?
No, I think we can go a little bit deeper later on in the conversation. Maybe let me extend the same questions to a couple more of the people on the panel. Maybe Amal, from your side, what do you feel has been or is the contribution of the SME sector when it comes to the UAE exports?
So I don't have exact statistics, Lorenzo, but given what we faced in the past 2 years, well, I'm not quoting numbers, but what we faced in the past 2 years, from the impact of the pandemic, the impact of recent wars in Europe, the impact of just closing down, extreme weather conditions, resignations across the globe, I think the supply chains have been impacted globally. And what this poses is an opportunity for SMEs to upskill and reskill and support the global supply chains. Now, in the GCC and specifically in UAE, we have, like Jonpaul said, we have strong relationships with GCC countries, and I think we can capitalize and leverage on these those trade agreements to support the global supply chains that are that have become very much regional as well, not just global. So I think it poses a very strong opportunity for SMEs, but it also poses its own challenges.
Now, the key question here could be, Mr. Zishan, maybe this could be addressed to you. How can the SMEs take advantage of these free trade agreements, of the incentives being given to them? And do you feel, are we really maximizing the true potential that SMEs have in becoming or contributing further to exports coming from the UAE?
No, absolutely. I think, as Lorenzo, you mentioned that SMEs account for more than 90% of the GDP, and they also account for more than 80% of the overall employment in the country itself. I think it's very important to mention that the UAE is really capitalizing on infrastructure which the leadership and management of the decision makers have developed. So in terms of ease of doing business, setting up the company, and then using UAE as a regional hub for your global expansion, that has been tested, and we have seen the precedents. I think coming back to what ECI does, we have launched an extensive dedicated SME Protect SME support program, which is primarily focusing on export. And that is in addition to what 3 basic programs were launched by the UAE government. One is the Operation 300 billion, which is primarily an amount of 30 billion dirham was allocated, particularly for providing support to SME finance. And then we have seen Abu Dhabi Export Office being set up, and there is an amount there allocated, which is $150 million to help companies to buy UAE products. And last but not least is the Khalifa Fund, which also leads to a sizable of 2 billion dirham capital allocated only and particularly for SMEs. In terms of the economic participation agreement, SEPA, Comprehensive Economic Participation Agreement, signed with these countries, and as of today we have 3 agreements signed already. We have already seen the fruits of these agreements being enjoyed by the UAE corporates. I think within ECI, we have, on the back of these agreements, we have already seen 3 agreements signed and guaranteed by ECI, and that also brought in an enhanced access to financing for SMEs, particularly in the UAE. And we're working with as well as local banks and international banks to make this happen. So I think these are very impressive numbers which we can further deliberate on.
Indeed. Thank you for those details, Zishan, and definitely we would like to go deeper into some of those initiatives. Maybe Dr. Aggarwal, from your side, a little bit on what's your outlook? How do you see the SME sector taking part of the UAE exports? What kind of incentives? Are we giving enough incentives to the SME sector to take part of this? And perhaps slowly we can get into the conversation of what are the main markets that we're really going into as an SME to export from here, the UAE, and what particular industries are more favorable to export from here for the SME sector?
Thank you very much. See, I would like to, in this at this stage of conversation, I'd like to bring in 2 points. I mean, one is just that I was quite struck by the statistics which you already mentioned in the beginning about diversification. I think I have the figures that in 2009, the share of GDP of oil was 85%, whereas it has been reduced, whereas the overall GDP has gone up, but the share of oil has reduced to 30% in 2022. That says a lot about the efforts, fructification of the efforts made at diversification of the economy. And, in the conversation, one more point I would like to make is the importance of services. In any case, in your country, in UAE, the real estate, tourism, retail, digital services, they have made, very rapid strides. And I would like to mention that when we talk about the SMEs, our ITC is doing surveys of this kind, every year to gauge the prospects for SMEs. One striking factor is obviously larger enterprises are always more, well performing, and the productivity gap is there vis-a-vis the small firms. But in the services sector, that gap is much smaller. It is for 2 or 3 reasons, because entry barriers for SMEs in the services sectors are lower. Second, there are fewer benefits of economies of scale in the services sector of the kind that I mentioned, and returns from agility, which is a hallmark of SMEs, is much greater. So in that respect, I think no conversation about SME exports, etc., will be complete without discussing the role of services, which I think UAE, Abu Dhabi is well placed, and your emphasis in the recent past on tourism and the attendant service industries of retail, even real estate, along with the large firms, there's a very big room for SMEs to participate in those kind of activities. Thank you.
Indeed, some very good points there. Thank you, Dr. Aggarwal. Now, Amal, I remember getting ready for this conversation of today. You had worked a lot on drafting. What are the sort of necessary steps for building a strategy, a successful strategy for the SME sector or for SME companies to focus themselves on exports? For the purpose of today's call, there's a lot of SMEs on the call today. I'm sure there's over 70 people connected at the moment. What are some of the tips that we could give SMEs for building a successful export strategy?
Thank you. That's a great question, Lorenzo. We've worked with a lot of companies, large and small. And I think when we are focused on the SME sector specifically, I think to set yourself up for success when it comes to exports is firstly assess your own abilities and capabilities. One of the shortfalls and one of the problems that most SMEs would fall into when they're exporting is that they don't understand necessarily what their capabilities are to address demand or new demand coming from those new export markets. Now, what I would say in short, because it's a very big world of information out there, but you do have a lot of information. So what I would say first is understand your capabilities, your manufacturing capabilities and your production capabilities. Understand your unique selling point. What is unique about your product? How would you sell your product? And then go into understanding the potential markets that you can get, that you can export into. A lot of companies just choose the export market based on personal connections, and that's fair because it does help you there. But at the same time, it might not be the right export market for you. So one way to find out is to understand the potential market size of the different export markets, the potential export markets for you. What was their growth? What was their growth in terms of their own imports for your products? Finally, I would say, even though there's a lot of details, which again, I'm not going to go into, finally, I would say be connected with the local mission of depending on the country you're in, but the local export authorities usually have local missions in the different countries. So stay connected with those local missions to ensure you get the right connections in terms of distributors, agents, and potential partners you have for those export markets. These are, I would say, the key success factors. The rest is a lot of information, and I will end this answer by saying stay informed. Stay informed about not just the market and its growth, but about your potential competitors, about the prices in the country, about whether you're with the right distributor or not. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of companies and association that would help give you this information for free or not, for free or maybe for a little fee. I know somebody from on the chat asked about textiles and exporting textiles, and I was just reading some.
You've gone on mute, Amal, for some reason on your computer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just saying that I saw a question about exporting textiles in the chat, and one of the studies I read recently for free was on cbi.eu, and that provides you with a lot of information on how to export to Europe, what are some of the main sectors or main products to export, what do you need to look out for, the trends, etc. And that's just for Europe. So there are different sources of information that will hopefully give you the right tips you need to ensure success in your export journey.
Excellent.
Lorenzo, can I just add there a bit more about the export gateway there for Abu Dhabi, because I think this is where it was our first big initiative to provide information to all companies in Abu Dhabi, but in particular SMEs. So we identified, I think, absolutely agreeing with Amal, that transparency and information is one of the big issues. So a lot of SMEs don't know where to start looking for that information. It's very difficult, whether it's even in your own country, but when you're looking at alternative markets, it becomes even more complicated. So we developed Abu Dhabi Export Gateway, and I know Dubai's got a similar one as well. But what it provides any Abu Dhabi company with a license is access to huge amounts of information. So we've covered 13 initial large sectors, one of which is textile, and it includes 59 million total records. But what we've tried to design is a system that takes all that data, global data, and puts it into a usable manner. So if I want to know everything about Singapore as a market, within 60 seconds, I can get a 200-page document with everything I need to know about Singapore, including the trading statistics of Abu Dhabi and Singapore, import-export, including their risk analysis as a market, including potential partners in Singapore, so it links you with partners. It also publishes all opportunities in Singapore, so you can determine whether you want to bid for any contracts. And it includes 60 different markets at the minute, so there's 60, Singapore, India, etc., etc. So very quickly, you can get a lot of information on new markets and understand whether that is feasible for you as a company. If so, who can I contact there and partner with? What opportunities are available there? And also information about what their import standards are in those countries and what the requirements are. So it provides a one-stop shop for pretty much all your export needs in terms of research in those markets.
So any SME has access to this portal. Could you maybe give a reference where to find this information for people watching this webinar?
Yeah, currently the access is for Abu Dhabi licensed companies, and it's www.adeg.atlp.ae.
All right.
So that's adeg.atlp.ae.
Great. If in the meantime, when we talk to some of the other speakers, if you can write it down on the chat function, maybe people can directly click on it and follow up. Or maybe my team, if you find this link, please make sure to share it with you. And Jonpaul, I would like to continue on the discussion. What precisely is it Abu Dhabi is doing for the SME sector, for the exports? As a company, we set up a lot of businesses in Abu Dhabi. Maybe I can plug in a little bit of our project. We have, together with the Department of Economic Development of Abu Dhabi, we created a portal called setupinabudabi.ae, where we are also facilitating and supporting SMEs and entrepreneurs to set up their businesses in Abu Dhabi. Also, my team can put up this website there. So, Zishan, going back to you a little bit on these tips, markets, what sectors, Any more insights that we can give on this specific topic before we move on to some other areas of interest on today's conversation?
Absolutely. So I think it's a very, very exciting discussion going on. Yes, it's very important to get the information, where to sell, what to sell, and how to sell. But I think for SMEs, it's extremely important to be protected in terms of their payment, because they are operating on yes, margins are high in SME business, but so is the risk is. So I think our job as a federal government entity is to make sure that these SMEs are protected when something is wrong, when their customer is not paying, when their customer is not willing to open an LC and there is no down payment which is expected. So I think it all boils down to one factor, that we are enhancing, or our products and services are enhancing the global competitiveness of a UAE trader or a manufacturer. That's a very, very important factor, that our services are bringing this confidence into the ecosystem. With our guarantee, banks will be more willing to finance. With our guarantee, SMEs will be more secured and will be more willing to go and discover into the new market. And as of today, in last 4 years, when we were established in 2018 through cabinet resolutions, we have facilitated, I can proudly say that, more than 18 billion dirham of international trade. And that corresponds to our exposure in more than 118 countries. And 90% of our customers, which we have approximately 100 odd customers in our portfolio, and 90% are SMEs. So we have played an important role in facilitating these SMEs to go discover new markets, encourage them to penetrate into new markets, but with their risk protected. And I think it's worth mentioning that we have a database access of 360 million buyers globally across multiple sectors. So if you are interested to export into new markets, but if you want to be protected, please contact us. So I can be contacted on our LinkedIn page or on our website, and one of our business development guy will be very happy to get in touch, whoever wants to obtain these services.
Excellent. Now, Zishan, you talked about a very key point here. You talked about global competitiveness. What is the position of the UAE as a global competitive UAE export-oriented economy? People see the UAE perhaps as an expensive destination when it comes to the standard of living, and so it's the UAE an export sort of powerhouse and able to compete on price with certain other export-oriented nations?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. I'm not sure how many of the viewers know that UAE is manufacturing 28 parts of a very, very large industry, which is an aviation industry. So Airbus and Boeing, there are 28 parts are manufactured in UAE. And it was a surprise for me as well, that how important that infrastructure is in the UAE to attract these manufacturers and investors. Yes, you can argue, yes, the cost of living might be high, but you look at the ease of doing business, and it's very important part of the SDGs of UN, that sustainable, infrastructure and needs and access to those sustainable resources, be it water, be it healthcare system, be it cost of doing business, be it a security. And I think the numbers are evident itself. As Dr. Aggarwal mentioned, that you look at that how UAE managed to reduce its dependence on oil sector from 80 to 85% to 30%. And that is itself is a testimony that yes, how effectively it is working. Yes, I think the program of Make It in the Emirates, which is launched by Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology, the venture, capital infrastructure being laid out as we speak now, all the economic departments of all the Emirates, be it Dubai DED, be it Abu Dhabi DED, which is represented by Jonpaul, we see a very, very fast track approach when it comes to attracting new businesses and bringing those manufacturers on ground. As we speak, I think we had a meeting this morning with a very, very large power player in the world, and they are setting up, moving their factories to UAE, despite that, yes, maybe the cost of relocating those factories are high, but there is a very delicate balance which a businessman has to create, that how effectively I can do business without worrying about a security situation, without worrying about the red tapes, which can, sometimes be very annoying for the businessman. So I think that's my humble submission on this point.
I think another important point to bring in this conversation, maybe Dr. Aggarwal, you can help us on this point, is the power of the UAE's logistics corridor in connecting the ports and the airport, having Emirates Cargo, one of the biggest cargo companies in the world, that is connecting more cities and more destinations than any other city in the world. The same with the ports and the facilities that we have. This really poses as a great advantage for any SME company, even with the opportunities that re-exporting represent, right? For example, having a distribution center in Dubai and importing from Europe and perhaps distributing into other parts of the world, into Africa and so on. So any thoughts on this and the importance of the UAE in this regard, Dr. Aggarwal?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would say, building on what Jonpaul said and what Zishan said, and your question on these aspects, I think UAE has already done quite a lot. But obviously, one need not be satisfied all the time, because continuously one has to keep on improving. Let me, give some illustrations. And these are not Abu Dhabi, because international comparisons are available for UAE, not for Abu Dhabi. So to that extent, please take it into consideration. See, logistics performance index, because of your very good roads, ports, airports, etc. As per the latest 2018 World Bank LPI, Logistics Performance Index, UAE was 14th out of 160 countries. Again, I emphasize, question is not about good or good enough. Question is that how can you be the best, right? In that sense, in your Abu Dhabi vision of 2030, you have already benchmarked your performance against 3 or 4 countries, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, Ireland. So let me try to give you where there is room for improvement. When I say room for improvement, you are already very, very good. So please take it in that spirit that, where there is room for improvement. It is, I found that OECD trade facilitation indicators, I had a look at it and compared it with your benchmark countries. There are 3 areas, where there is room for improvement. And these 3 intertwined areas are: 1, trade governance and impartiality; internal and external border agency cooperation; and the third one is involvement of the trade community. Given the emphasis on SME development, Abu Dhabi's vision for 2030, that's why we are here talking about SMEs, I would say that perceptions of institutional impartiality and governance, they matter quite a lot for SMEs. I think Amal also referred to that in an earlier presentation. Compared to large companies, which can be comfortable even with personal relationship-based governance systems. And therefore, promoting impartiality in trade governance, or the perception, I'm sure that you already have, perceptions of impartiality in trade governance institutions and involvement of trade community should be emphasized. Through the awareness raising among SMEs about the significant institutional and trading environmental reforms. Second, I think this point also came up with Zishan, that it can become very complicated. What we have noticed in our own technical assistance programs, helping SMEs navigate the complex regulatory landscape through mentoring programs goes a long way in building their trust in institutional impartiality, etc. Third, SMEs should be involved in the regulatory reform agenda, which I have already said that is a continuing effort. And in that respect, establishing a proper national trade facilitation committee, which is also mandated under the WTO trade facilitation agreement, and strengthening it if it already exists, will help in ensuring external-internal border agency coordination, involving SMEs, as well as striving continuously to keep on reforming and attain the #1 position in the world. And the best practices, I will end by saying that there are 2 or 3 best practices in this regard. One is that NTFCs, along with all relevant government organizations which are involved in this reform process, one has to give a prominent place to the private sector, including MSME representation through their associations. Second, discussion of issues at every step of the policy making. And I emphasize on that, from design to implementation and monitoring of the reforms, because it is the SMEs who will use the system, and they are the excellent people to give you a feedback on how your reforms are working at the cutting edge level. And finally, it is the SMEs, many a time they feel that they should also have the technical capacity to speak with the same technical jargon as spoken by the government functionaries. Then only they feel comfortable sitting with the government functionaries and trying to give their own views. And this is what I think should be emphasized by the government to create the governance and the international trading environment, which helps in competitiveness, especially as you mentioned, it's a high-cost economy, yet in those niche areas where you need high skills, competitiveness becomes very important. It's logistics-based. So to get the maximum out of that niche that you have because of excellent infrastructure, and I'm sure that going forward through technology and through knowledge-based institutions, you can actually make a lot of difference and make your SMEs thrive with a lot of competitive advantage.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Some really good points there, Dr. Aggarwal. Thank you for those comments. From the attendees, I can see a few people asking if this session is being recorded. It is, and we will be gladly sending you a link after the event to everyone that confirm attendance on your emails, so that you can watch this again or send it to your friends and colleagues that might find some value in this session. And we have a few questions related to IT related products, Jonpaul, and you're also raising your hands. Maybe, is there something that we can answer on this IT side of things? Is there made in the UAE IT strong export oriented industry, would you say, in the country?
I'm not sure on that topic, Lorenzo. I was going to add, continuing from Doctor's discussion.
Sure.
So I was just going to say, certainly in Abu Dhabi, we are actually quite unique globally, and we've worked closely with the OECD, and we've started discussions with the Doctor and his team in ITC. It was acknowledged how important trade facilitation is to diversify the economy in 2019 in Abu Dhabi, to the point that a new function was created in the DED. Now that's quite rare globally, where there's a specific function within the government economic department to look at trade facilitation. Normally it's a customs thing and not a wider economic thing in terms of governance. So just establishing that unit has had huge impacts in Abu Dhabi. So everything that Dr. said in terms of involving the private sector is essential to everything that we do. And Abu Dhabi established the public policy framework a couple of years ago, which includes involving the private sector from start to finish and monitoring and evaluation of policies as well. And we take that very close to heart and build it into everything that we're doing. So this year, not only have we continued to develop the single window, where we now have over 800 services in one place that you enter the information once and you don't have to visit different websites, but we also conducted our own OEC study on the trade information, trade facilitation indicators. We've also built a new system to automate time release studies. So for those that are not aware of what that is, normally countries test their performance in the ecosystem about how quick you can import export by a manual exercise, clipboard exercise over a period, 2-3 weeks, let's say. What we've developed is a system that uses all transactions and enables us to really accurately state what our performance is. And we can monitor where we need to improve. As Doctor said, we're actually really good globally in terms of benchmarking, but we want to continue to improve to be the best. And finally, that's led to us, sorry, one more project that we conducted this year was the fee policy project. So fees and costs within the ecosystem can be a bit of a minefield. How does an SME understand whether their logistics agent is charging them a fair price or not? Because a lot of the time agents will say this cost is from the government, we're passing the cost on. So we conducted a huge undertaking to capture all costs in the ecosystem. And then we've got various different policy recommendations to improve our competitiveness in that system moving forwards. Again, we're pretty competitive, but we're looking at the importance of continuing to lower those costs on industry. And those costs hurt SMEs more than they do big businesses where they can soak them up. Now, with the ATLP single window as well, what it does is create journeys. So as an SME, you can choose to be your own importer, exporter in that system, and you can use it as a tool, or you can use a logistics company to do it. But basically, it'll give you the information about what the regulations and policies are for any kind of journey, and it'll also tell you the costs. And we're moving forward this year to develop the trade information portal as well, which will help SMEs.
Excellent. There's some exciting initiatives coming up from Abu Dhabi there. Maybe Amal, on this topic of, I'm excited to learn more about made in the UAE. Do you feel that the made in the UAE stamp is something that could become well known around the world? Something that is made in the UAE could have that global sort of appeal and repercussion, the same way that you have nowadays made in China, made in India, some of these export powerhouses?
Absolutely, and we have actually conducted a recent study. I'm not going to share made in where, but it was a city in the GCC. And I think countries are increasingly looking at the impact of such a stamp on the products that are exported from those countries. The made in UAE or made in Abu Dhabi or made in Dubai stamp does create a branding sort of add branding equity to the products from UAE or from from Abu Dhabi or from Dubai. I think it supports and it gives some sort of credibility to the brands that are being exported. It also supports in expanding them, expanding their scale, increasing employment, as you know. But yes, I think with the right marketing activities and the right investments in upskilling and technology and in financing for UAE SMEs, I think we can get there. Great,
great. Mr. Zishan, anything else on this topic made on the UAE, or we move on to some other topics that you're involved at your institution and some of the support that you're giving on to SMEs?
No, I think thank you so much, Lorenzo. Really a very, very interactive discussion. I'm enjoying the discussion. I think from our side, a few bits from my side is that, yes, our eligibility criteria is make it in the Emirate. So ECI is primarily focusing on goods which are manufactured, made, or assembled, and then re-exported out of UAE. And there is a very interesting program which was announced by the UAE government, which is called ICV, In-Country Value Program. And there is a separate department which has been established actually within the government framework which tracks the companies and encourages the company that they have to submit a certificate that how much in-country value has been contributed, and they get a certain treatment. And I think this national ICV program has really positively impacted lots of organizations and companies to demonstrate that how important is that STEM. And coming back to the point which you mentioned, I think it's a good brand name. If you see that made in the UAE, that means that, as Dr. Aggarwal mentioned, that there are very well structured reforms in place, which were done a couple of years ago, and now we're reaping the fruits of those reforms. So I think these are our submission. And if you look at the progress of ICV program as of today, I think the report shows that within 2021, there is 88.5 billion plus redirected into the local economy. 5,000 locally based suppliers approved across multiple sectors, and there are 2,000 jobs created just to monetize and monitor this ICV program. I think that's massive developments, and numbers are counting every day.
Excellent. Mr. Aggarwal, what could be some of the risks involved for SMEs when venturing into exports? What are some of the pitfalls that SMEs should be being careful about when getting started?
Right. I mean, let me just, before coming to that, which I will answer, I also want to make one point about your branding. You know, as all of you have pointed out, UAE is already in that league of nations, you know, where people can justifiably be confident of the quality of goods coming out of UAE, and therefore there is value in that. Institutional reforms or institutional credence through quality control, you know, that I think is a great thing to go forward and maintain that and reinforce that high quality image. And if any of the manufacturers do not conform to the standards, you know, the high standards that are prescribed, there should be an action taken, you know, corrective action, so that the people get a confidence that, you know, you have the internal systems, institutional mechanisms to control quality, which will reinforce the brand that you want to create or already have to a large extent obtained. Having said that, on the risks, see, as you have seen, I will, you know, there are more risks, and we are not here to talk theory about the risks. I would lay emphasis only on one, which is the recent one, which is coming. And I'm not talking of the COVID related, etc., which, you know, many webinars have already discussed quite a lot. I'm talking about the ESG requirements, environmental, social, and governance standards, which are becoming more and more a norm in being part of the supply chains, etc. And they can suddenly, because many countries are coming up with new standards every day. So this system is evolving a lot, and therefore one should keep abreast of the changes and create systems so that your SMEs can conform with the rapidly evolving environment, social, and governance standards culture, I would use the word, which is coming into play. As I said, I am not talking theory about stating all the risks. This is the most important risk, especially in a more developed country like yours, which your SMEs should be able to conform with, especially when you are accessing high value markets. It's not the commoditized. You are aiming at niche markets with high value products, and there these standards will become more and more a norm. And on top of it, I'm emphasizing again, will constantly evolve. So to keep track of them and prepare your SMEs to meet those standards, I think is called for in a place in the trajectory that UAE is following in terms of supporting its SMEs. Thank you.
So Lorenzo, if you allow me, I'll briefly touch upon some of the operational challenges which SMEs are facing, because we have been very heavily interacting with SMEs that if they want to grow, if they want to do business, if they want to expand, what challenges they face. I think the first challenges they face, and one of the questions was there as well, that it is difficult for them to access financing. So enhanced access to financing, and then cost-effective financing, because if you go to the banks who are particularly focusing on SMEs, that we see that the margins getting or going towards heavily double-digit, which is not a sustainable model. The second challenge which we have seen is the very limited leadership resources in terms of getting the best-in-class credit management system, getting the best-in-class sales collection system and recovery system, And then even when you have the business development efforts, there are very, very limited resources available to SMEs. And last but not least is basically the absence of planning and strategy execution. So these were, we actually have done a survey, and these were 3 very, very important challenges which SMEs has opted for when they see it. And I think one of that challenge we are addressing, that we are providing this credit management system to SMEs. And the second solutions which we are working on very closely is that to provide a better and enhanced access to SMEs towards funding, because when we provide our guarantee to banks, that risk becomes a more acceptable risk for banks, because their risk is not on ABC corporate company established in another country, but their risk is guaranteed by a federal government entity with our AA- rating. So it becomes a more bankable transaction. So I think we have tried to address 2 key challenges, but yes, there's a lot more to go.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that, Mr. Zishan. And we're slowly getting to the end of today's session. We have about 8 minutes left for today. Maybe what I would like to do now is do a final round of final comments. I will start with you, Amal, and get from you your final thoughts for today in a wrap up, which is how can we encourage more SMEs to get involved in looking to becoming export oriented? What kind of help are we giving? What can we do more from our side of things, whether it's semi-government entities, government entities, associations, and so on?
Great, Lorenzo. I would say exporting provides you a lot of opportunity to scale up your operations. I think if you establish a good export opportunity where you have guaranteed demand or you have continuous demand for your products, I think that will help you not only scale up in terms of production, but also to upgrade your products and maybe specialize more. That's one thing. The second thing, I think that's the most important tip I would give any potential exporter is ask for help. Ask for help from the local authority where you're at, ask for help from local consultancies maybe, or local groups, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of expertise out there, and you will be able to get it. Just like Mr. Zishan said, you can get a lot of support, specifically in the UAE, where it is, for example, a challenge to get financing from banks. You can get support by going to the right people for the right information. So I would say that's my one tip for any potential exporter.
Great. Thank you for that, Amal. Thank you, dear, for being with us today. Jonpaul, your final thoughts for today?
Thanks, Lorenzo. I think my takeaway would be that the UAE and Abu Dhabi, for the UAE and Abu Dhabi, the SME sector is extremely important. And even though sometimes you may feel alone, there's a lot of incentives and a lot of help and support that's being provided. And it's very much central to most of our strategies to expand and help those sectors grow internationally and to really take the UAE companies globally. And I think globally that's happening. We're in a very privileged situation that many aspects are already in place, which other countries do not have. We've got some of the best infrastructure in the world. We've got full government support. So please get in touch if you need any help. The SME is very central to the export roadmap that we're developing, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll reach out and see how we can help.
Excellent, Jonpaul. Thank you for those comments and for taking part of the day. A lot of very valuable contributions coming there from Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development. Mr. Aggarwal, your final thoughts for today, your final comments, and your main takeaways of today's session.
Yeah, I will, lay emphasis on the need for institutional alignment or strengthening, especially for 2 purposes. One is to continuously work towards improving the competitive environment or the international trading environment. And I already gave the example of National Trade Facilitation Committee to be able to do so. The second is for meeting the standards by your MSMEs. That's also a continuously evolving trend which needs to be met, and which will also go a long way in strengthening the UAE brand as you want to create it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Aggarwal, for taking the time for being here with us today. Thank you. Mr. Zishan, your final thoughts for today?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to say final thoughts, because I think the real work will start after this. So I think final thought is that if you are a company based in UAE and you want support and help, it is becoming or transitioning towards becoming a complete digital economy. So you'll find lots of solutions online. Please contact the right person at the right time. And I think we have the right infrastructure to support companies, all the way from the government departments to financial institutions, as well as companies who are there to support, basic business services. So, and I think we are targeting, our objective is to help SMEs to grow, penetrate into new markets, contribute towards the success of Make It in the Emirate, as well as US AED 300 billion UAE export project. And we are trying to play our role as a federal government entity. And if any information is required, our website is there, and feel free to send us a note and we'll take it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mr. Iqbal. And I can see my team already extended the LinkedIn links to each of the speakers here. For all the attendees, we've had over 70 people connected throughout the whole session. I think it's a unique opportunity for anybody watching this webinar to have access to these 4 speakers and their wealth of knowledge. All 4 are involved through institutions to helping the SME sector become more export-oriented. So please reach out to them, look into what their institutions are doing and how they're getting involved. And I'm sure they will be more than happy to engage with you and understand more in how they can help you and your organization. We will be sending a copy of this webinar, and also we will send a full report of the main takeaways of today's session. Once again, Dr. Aggarwal, Jonpaul, Amal, and Mr. Iqbal, thank you so much for taking the time for being here with us.
Thank you, Lorenzo. It was a pleasure.
It's a
Thanks
pleasure.
everyone for listening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you all, and thanks to all the attendees once again, and we will see you again in our next session. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.